As the Biden administration continues to wrestle with how to best deal with Vladimir Putin's aggression on Ukraine's borders, it's facing new questions about its preparedness or lack thereof for last summer's withdrawal from Afghanistan. Let's bring in our Bream team panel for tonight's foreign policy discussion. Democratic strategist Kevin Walling and former Army Special Ops Intelligence Analyst Brett Velicovivh. Great to have you both back.
Hey, thanks, Shannon.
Hey, Shannon, good to see you.
All right, let's start with Ukraine and Russia. Brett, is there any scenario in which you see Putin backing down without invading or attacking or crossing that Ukrainian border?
No, I think the whole situation is a total mess. I mean, I don't see any scenario where Russia doesn't continue its escalation and eventually cross the border into Ukraine. It might not be imminent, but it feels inevitable because Ukraine is the perfect front line in Putin's strategic goals of testing U.S. alliances and making aggressive attempts to further drive a wedge between the United States and NATO. And the sad reality is it's working. The intel is clearly pointing to Putin and Russia not stopping their troop buildup and only increasing. Otherwise, this new U.S. troop deployment in the region wouldn't be necessary. And these confusing responses from the White House about Ukraine and President Biden's inability to draw a line in the sand with Putin is only making matters worse. It's not helping. The Russians are running circles around this administration, outmaneuvering us on many different fronts. They're taking the lessons learned from Afghanistan and embarrassing Biden along the way, and our leaders need to wake up. America is starting to lose its influence globally as a result. The president isn't exactly being concrete with what we're going to do here if Russia invades. He only seems to be clear on what we're not going to do, and that's practically nothing if tanks start rolling across the border. He's basically signaling to Putin every single chance he gets that we're not going to be doing anything substantial about it unless this escalation spills over into a NATO country, which Ukraine is not. And he's practically publicly inviting him to come into Ukraine. Sure, we're sending troops out, but that's to NATO countries to protect spillover from war, not to protect Ukraine. So these forces aren't even going to fight in Ukraine. So the messaging that these troops are deploying is relatively useless because in the public, we say, hey, yes, U.S. troops are going out to NATO, but in private, Putin sees that we're pulling some of our most effective troops from the ground. We're talking special forces teams who are in Ukraine. These guys were designed to train people in guerrilla warfare, which no doubt would be needed if Russia invades. So I just think we need to figure out this strategic messaging, this diplomatic messaging better because the stakes are high and the stability and security of Europe is of vital interest to the United States.
Kevin, we have sent in defensive weaponry. Other countries are sending things into Ukraine as well. There has been talk of bipartisan support of sanctions, and yet that doesn't seem to be coming together just yet. Do you think they'll get that done in Washington? And will it be effective?
Yes, Shannon, I think it will be, and that might be one point that we see in terms of bipartisan agreement with regards to that overarching sanctions bill making its way through the United States Senate. I think where Brett ended is where I'll pick up, in that Europe's defense and security is of our most important interest in the world. He is right in that Putin is making these advances to drive a wedge between the United States and our 29 allies as part of NATO. And Shannon, you rightly point out we've provided training, a lot of material, weapons. This is not the Ukraine that he so effectively invaded through Crimea just a decade ago. This is a Ukraine that is highly trained, that can beat back many of these frontal assaults from the Russians and this aggression, and that we should stand with any democracy against an authoritative regime like we're seeing play out on this border.